You look just like I did when I had to listen to Obama. I don't know if y'all. I was holding my head up and doing the best I could to keep my eyes.
We can put the mute button on the TV for Obama.
Oh, yeah.
He was in
Yeah,
the
well,
audience.
it's
so-
like a lady said to me at Publix not too long ago. She comes up, she's looking at me, and she's like, "You're Mr. Mica." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She says, "Well, I've seen you on TV." She said, and I see you in person. She says, "I like you better on TV. I can turn you off." She got me pretty good. Well, with those comments, if it's allowed or if you like, I'd be glad to take questions. Yeah. Ms. Dan.
John, with the increase in mileage that automobiles are getting, I would suspect it's having a detrimental impact on the amount of revenue coming
The
into the
trust
mile.
fund, yeah, that's going.
How is that being
Going to be
handled?
resolved? Well, we have supplemented some of the losses from other existing revenue sources, transferred it in, so we wouldn't take it out of general tax. That's just a Band-Aid, and that's for 5 years. Long-term, you're going to have to find another way. We have 1 million cars a year coming off of gasoline. I just saw a complete fleet of vehicles, all natural gas. The plug-ins, you come up in the House office building, I'll show you. A lot of people are driving the electric cars now. They plug them in, actually, they're getting them free now in the House of Representatives. But you see the charging stations, they're not paying. So the system is broken, needs to be fixed. We will transition out to either going to the source of the energy. It'll have to be recalculated and something fair. So, you're paying according to the weight of the vehicle, the kind of fuel you're using, the distance you're traveling, and calculate it so it's fair.
So effectively, it'll be cost per mile of travel. There'll have to be something along those lines.
Yeah, did you see Obama advocated a 24-cent increase on gasoline?
Per
It's
gallon.
down in price. That's not going to pass.
No.
And he was doing it to the at the well, so you wouldn't see it at the pump in a separate tax. Right now, it's 18.4 cents. And it's been 18.4 cents since Wynn was driving that clunker that got 15 miles to a gallon. The average is now 24 to 25 miles for every car out there. So that does need to be readjusted according to the new kinds of fuels that are coming. We've got 5 years to work on that. And we're looking at a couple, there's been different proposals to look at.
Just make sure you let them know that the cars weigh less than they did prior
That's true,
years.
and that's why I said based on the weight of the vehicle.
Yep.
The heavier, the more you use the roads up, so the more you should pay. I mean, it needs to be fair.
Yep.
Other questions?
I appreciate most of your votes, particularly the ones where you didn't go along with most of your Republican cohorts, like Glass-Steagall and the bank bailout.
Yeah. Glass-Steagall was a tough one.
I'd like you to explain what I don't like, and then give me 30 seconds to
Yeah,
comment.
go ahead.
I called you up on your telephone town hall recently about the genetically modified foods.
Yes.
That bill that you voted for, which would in effect prevent any state from mandatory labeling, or the people like the people of California, they voted a state amendment. I think Oregon or Washington did. The state of Vermont legislature voted to require labeling. Russia won't allow GMOs in their country. China will not allow growing of them. It will allow the imports. 40 to 50 countries require some form of labeling, but that law you voted, that passed and you voted for, would put the kibosh on all that.
Yeah.
It's a dumb law, in my opinion, and it just favors Monsanto and the GMO companies, and it really goes against the people. So could you explain how you...
Well, again, I think it was to not allow the states to set their own. And what you want to do is go after the Monsantos and others, because you have every state with its own level of what's acceptable for GMOs. I think the most important thing, and I've sparred with our European Union counterparts because they were on a ban all GMOs. I think the most important thing is transparency, but you need some truth in the transparency. You need some standardization of what's acceptable, so that, and sometimes the groups are pretty effective in lobbying the state legislatures to give the least amount of information or the most favorable amount of information. But if you have a federal standard and you have federal disclosure and transparency, with that type of a commercial product and a consumable product, I think that's where it would behoove us to move in that direction, as opposed to having all these things. And a lot of that gets sold across state lines. They develop it in one and sell it in another, and it's at a different standard. And the consumer is really left in the lurch, I believe. So, I mean, we have a difference of opinion. Some people say every state should be allowed to set its own. We don't do that on some other consumable and drugs and things like that too. So that's just my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. We don't know the full effects of GMOs. For the most part, we're pretty early in the game, but you want to take as much protection because at least give people good, solid, standard information that they know is as correct as possible at the time. And that's the goal that I would like to see. And then they make the bad choices. Well, let me have some more GMOs on you.
Well, you can't make a choice if it's not labeled. You can buy organic, which cannot be GMO.
Right.
But we don't. There are segments of FDA that are corrupt and incompetent.
Yes.
When this first came out in the maybe the 80s, the Biotechnology Task Force of the FDA unanimously stated that these present unique risks. They had a statement. The political hacks who were appointed put the kibosh on that and rewrote them or forced them to rewrite it. It has not been scientifically proven to be safe with animal studies and no human studies.
Okay.
Put it on the label and let us make the decision.
Well, but not 50 different sets of standards and labels. For public protection, again, I think it's very important that we, is that Jim?
Yes.
I think it's important that you have some standardization in the transparency and then the information that is contained or required on the product.
So do we have
I'm-
the O stand for
more than
GMO?
genetically modified?
modified organisms. And they have been modifying organisms with all kinds of technology, and they've been doing it for many years. We don't know the full effects, and some of it, as the gentleman said, has been stated, can be harmful. But again, you try to get the consumer as much good information with some standard of what you're telling the consumer, as opposed to 50 states, 50 evaluations, 50 sets of labeling and all of that.
So would you be in favor of a national law that says any GMO has to be on the label?
I would, yes, I would. Oh,
I'll get something written up and bring it to your office to introduce.
Transparency and having that information available to the consumer. Hell, I go a lot further. I mean, you guys are getting poisoned by a lot of the imports. I've sat in on some of the hearings, and when you go to the store, don't ever buy anything fresh from Mexico, period. Nothing. You are taking your life in your hand. They've killed hundreds of people. They've poisoned thousands of people, made them sick. Don't eat, and look on the frozen stuff too. And they had people dying from their strawberries. And I sat in on the hearings. There is no way we can get, I mean, you take a chance sometimes with domestic product. There's some countries that are better than others, but Mexico, you were committing Russian roulette. If you buy one of those tomatoes, you're putting your life in your hands at the supermarket, I'm telling you. Yeah. And strawberries, any kind of berry, stay away from that stuff. They can make you deadly, and we've allowed that. It's very difficult. Now we're getting a lot of imports too from China and food things, and you have no idea how that stuff has been produced. We have no way of monitoring it. So I just say, you point out there's GMOs that we have a problem. There are other.
Congressman, a couple of years ago at Black Hammock, I remember a Christmas party out there.
Yeah.
Your wife and all of us were rooting for you to become the chairman of the Government Oversight and Reform Committee.
Mhm.
And over the polling that was taken over the last few primaries, the number one concern with the Republicans voter was big government, but we don't hear much in debates about it, right? Big government. And I worked for the big government for 36 years. I know how much waste in there in DOD, and I think Kathy Matthews probably knows it too. Because I worked for many different defense agencies over my 36 years, and there's billions of dollars of waste. And it's mainly predicated on paperwork. They pass paperwork around, and then I watch the Russian news, what's going on in Syria, and the weaponry. And I was involved with Coleman Research when they did the theater missile defense and the MEAS and Storm Arm Dome and all that stuff down there, Coleman Research down by International Drive by Lockheed Martin. The way we buy things in the government across all agencies, because I worked with VA acquisition with NASA.
Yeah.
The space shuttle was a paper pushing fiasco until Augustine from Lockheed Martin and his team went in there and says, guys, we got to shut this program down, because it turned into the paperwork mill instead of building hardware. So we were rooting for you to become our champion, and you didn't make it.
Well, the issue is 2/3 of the members of Congress are new, the House. 2/3 of them have never been there when we passed the budget. I am very fortunate. I've had 5 leadership positions. The Republicans elect them. I was the chairman of, I've already been the first chairman in the history of Central Florida for a full committee. My predecessor, Jim Oberstar, he waited 32 years before he became chairman. Don Young waited 28 years, the Republican, before me to become chairman. I've already been chairman. Before that, I had 4 leadership positions. Chairman of Civil Service, chairman of Criminal Justice, Drug Policy, chairman of General Government Operations. I've had 4 of those subcommittee chairmen and the full committee. So when it came to selecting a new chairman, timing is everything. And one of the reasons I didn't get it is I'd had so many. In fact, they tried to pass in the Republican conference that if you had one chairmanship, you weren't allowed to have another. So I got sort of a consolation prize, and there's a lot of value to me staying, my institutional knowledge. I mean, you saw things. The new members, a lot of them do not have a clue. It takes a long time. The bureaucrats BS them. Then the staff is new, guys. The staff is new. I just had Homeland Security staff up at the airport yesterday, and they're fairly green. Listen to my staff on government reform. I oversee all of transportation. That's aviation, rail, and highways. Then they gave me TSA, they gave me things I wanted and I'm good at because I know how to go after TSA. They gave me TSA. I have HUD because I've done public buildings and things like that. GSA, all the public buildings and changing those out. And then I have FEMA. That's my responsibility. Do you know how many people I have helping me on my subcommittee? 2. The guy that I have helping me now as my staff director was answering the phone 14 months ago. So next week I have 2 hearings. I have one on Zika. I'm doing an oversight. We haven't done one in government reform. That's important. It needs to be done. We've got an issue in Florida. I've got some Florida people coming in. What are we doing? Hold their feet to the fire. Make sure this stuff spreads, I got a problem. Then I've got another one, we're doing some research and work on waste in government vehicles. We've been working on that for a while.
We have two more questions.
So I have my hands full. I've sat in on the hearings on waste and DOD, and some of it is just jaw-dropping. This stuff, we have an inspector general, as you know, for Iraq, we had one for Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, they told me, they said, and I've been to Afghanistan, I sat and was in the face of the former president in his palace, and I told him, I said, we know you're stealing, we know we're lying in your pockets, we know your friends and your buddies are getting this money. But we had the inspector general come in and say, the entire Afghan national budget is like $4 or $5 billion, I think it is, $4 or $5 billion.
Oh my God.
We have been giving them in aid about $5 billion a year. In addition, from the international organizations and the others involved, another $5 billion a year. So they're getting about $10 billion a year. And the inspector general came and testified to us of DOD. He says, they can't steal or absorb as much money as we're giving them. They can't steal or absorb. I went back and I said, sir, would you repeat that? They can't steal or absorb any more. And he told me how many billions were in the pipeline. And I mean, they probably can't open enough Swiss accounts to stack the money. So, I go over, and I was pretty good. At that time, the Democrats were in charge, and I was with Pelosi. And you know, you've heard them on TV. Anything you want, we'll give you. Anything, we're going to save the world. We're going to give everybody everything. Everything's going to be free.
So we have two more questions.
So, in any event, the Democrat staffers had blocked the Republican staffer from coming with me. So I'm there at they wanted to have the dinner, and they wanted to have me to sit at the meeting. I said, I'm not going to sit. I said, not until my Republican staffer comes, because I'm going back to report to the speaker, to our leader. And I want my staff, Democrats bring 4 or 5. At that time, when they were in charge, they allowed one. So I just sat there. The president was up there, and he was fuming. And they finally gave up. They went in to sit down, and I wouldn't sit down until they were. I went to send a convoy to get the Republican staffer. So I play hardball with them too. But on waste, you're right on target, and we have to stay on it. Yeah, last question?
Karen, and then this young lady over here.
Okay.
Karen?
No, well, my
Go
question
ahead.
just was, when we were talking about genetically modified foods, was the bill to stop the hodgepodge of labeling?
Yes.
Without
Yes.
requiring any standard label? So
It
that now,
it stopped it. I don't know how specific it was, and just allowing one federal standard.
It just prevented any preemptive laws from, that a state would pass, and it said the FDA could require labeling if GMOs were found unsafe. Is that stupid? If they're unsafe, they're off the
bad.
market.
Yeah,
Well, again, I didn't like the hodgepodge. I would support some standardization and as much transparency as possible. Let the consumer at least have some idea of how they're being poisoned. Last question.
Hi, John. I saw something on the news yesterday morning that was quite upsetting. It involved the veterans and the ones out, they mentioned Afghanistan with the dogs. And evidently, when these soldiers are, have their dogs with them, they go out, they have these dogs for as long as the time that they're in there with, on deployment, which can be 1, 2 years or more sometimes. And what's happening is these dogs are given to the military buy them from contractors. And these soldiers, when they're finished, they're around and they come home, they want to bring these dogs with them. You know, they don't have very much to love out there, and they do love these dogs. And these dogs go through an awful lot too. Many of them have problems. You know, what's happening is the soldiers are going home without the dogs. They're going back to the contractors, and then they're recycling the dogs like garbage, and making the military pay again for what they've already paid for once. And you know, the guys come home and say, "Where's my dog?" They can't get a straight answer.
I hadn't seen that report, but
Well,
we
yeah,
can
it
look
was
at
on Fox yesterday.
Okay.
And, you know, they happened to say, you know, talk to your congressman, and of course we had this meeting. And I am gonna stick by congressman.
Well,
I mean, if you
it's
could
something we
find
can
out
bring to
or something about it, then, yeah,
Tommy, just remind me to ask Kevin. We'll
please,
follow up.
yeah,
I
and if you
appreciate
could
it.
get back.
And a lot of
out.
times, you know, you can contact us when you see something wrong.
Yeah,
I love people who've been in the defense, you know, department, and they've seen waste. That's how I get most of my information from people who tell us. I mean, I can't be in these programs. I don't know what's going on in them
yeah.
unless people tell us.
I
And
mean,
you've got
yeah.
some people with great expertise, and then people who step up that are courageous in the agencies and see waste, fraud, abuse. And then we're just at the top of the iceberg, folks, but I'm trying to get some of the young members better informed about, you know, how we can go after them, how we can hold their feet to the
They
fire,
actually
hold them
called it the
accountable.
doggy, you know, the veterans' problems, and this is the doggy veteran problem as well.
Well, I appreciate you raising it, and I appreciate you're all coming out, staying involved. This is you know, a good group because you stay informed and educated and stay on top of the issues. And always don't take what's in the media or what seems apparent. I try to let folks know, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. So thank you so much for inviting me.
One thing I wanted to say, he doesn't salute himself that often, but many transportation meetings I've had trying to help the transportation for the disabled. And you've always been a champion there, and I wanted to thank you for that.
Well, he's been a real champion and never lets up and stays active in the community and working with folks with disabilities.
And
And you deserve the credit. I'm getting paid.
just so you know, that Italian-American honor that you got, I think it's the same one that my uncle got several years ago, Thomas Ox, as you know. Yeah.
Right, honor.
He's passed a few months ago. But in any case, I want to remind people, if you want to come back, the next meeting is March 16th, right here. If you want a card of mine, it's right over here.
Isn't something happening on March 15th? Doesn't the representative want to make a recommendation for the House and the Senate? And that other one, the
They
presidency?
just interviewed me on Channel 6, and I predicted who the winner would be, which will be aired just before, the day before, well, it's the Sunday before the election.
Before,
And I'll let you in on the winner. I told you, it'll be the Republican with the most votes.
all right.
Can we get some pictures with you?
Yeah. Well, you're on a good issue. Just don't use the
All right. Keep rotating in there. Rotating in. Okay.
Hey, Antonio.
I guess. So what's been happening here for the first 5 years?
Thank you, thank you. All right, thank you. All right. So you're up for re-election again, sir?
Every 2 years, the contract starts.
The contract,
Founding fathers had a great plan. Come on, ready?
Nick invited me here first to get here, so. All right, thank you.
Hello. How you doing? Thanks for raising my.
I figured everybody was retired, 5 years. I can't imagine what Sam did. The wages tonight, two hangers.
The other guy goes down.
I think the masses
Are you trust him?
and it's on the way back. Because the church is actually right.
You were the 10 weeks that
It actually gets to, it's like a back road, you know how you go by the railroad station? It's not Ronald Reagan Boulevard. If you go up that road and turn right, you get to the back way to the church. It's right around the corner, so I'm gonna try to stop by afterwards.